Within 6 months of my being there, the board chairman who had actually brought us to Pennsylvania stood up in the middle of a board meeting, and there were only 5 or 6 elders at that time, and small church, everybody has a key to the building, and so he stood up in the middle of a meeting and very ceremoniously pulled out his keychain and took the key to the church off of his keychain, plopped it on the table, and walked out. About 12 months later, the next board chairman did essentially the same thing, and about 12 months later, the next one did.
Hey, listeners, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast, where if you've been listening for any amount of time, you know we're all about how to help you practically get your people to own the Great Commission personally. And today is an exciting day. We've got a new co-host with me, Daniel, who's going to introduce himself here in a minute, and then David Ashcraft, which, David, I can't wait to just kind of pick your brain on wisdom and practical tips for a lot of young church leaders who listen to the podcast. So, Daniel, why don't you go first? Just kind of introduce yourself. Give us a little bit of your personal background, who you are, where you came from, and then a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, man, super excited to be here. I am the guy that was probably voted in high school least likely to ever be a pastor, but here I am now. My wife and I just celebrated 16 years of marriage. We've got two amazing kids. My daughter is 15. My son is 13, in a really sweet season of parenting. And yeah, I've been in full-time ministry about 15 years now. And we just planted a church in January. We're out in the Phoenix, Arizona area. I stumbled across, the intentional churches stuff in the pre-launch phase, and we actually brought you guys on in the pre-launch stages to kind of get the blueprint built on how we wanted to really launch the church. So yeah, super excited to get to be here. Love what you guys are doing and love this whole thing.
It's good, man. And I know we have a lot of planters that listen too, but your plant is pretty amazing. So what did you have on launch weekend? And then how's the church doing now in terms of like seeing conversions and all that?
Yeah, I always give the caveat because I feel bad for every church planter because there's a story behind every number, right? And sometimes numbers can be discouraging. I don't mean it to be that. We have a unique story. When we grand opened our first services, we had 2,700 people that showed up. Since then, I think the coolest part for us is we've seen 1,000 people give their life to Jesus, and we just crossed 400 people that have been baptized in the last 6 months. So it's been pretty fun. We're running 4 services now, and yeah, we're averaging about 3,200 people a weekend right now.
Numbers, but David, how's that sound to you, man?
Sounds pretty nice. No, that's fantastic. So way to go, Daniel. That's great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
David,
thank
why
you.
don't you just give us just some of your background personally first before we get kind of into your ministry story?
Sure. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. My dad was a pastor, so ever since the time I was a little kid, everybody would always tell me that I was going to follow in his footsteps and be a pastor. And so I was very determined never to be a pastor. I didn't like people telling me what I was going to be when I grew older. I appreciated him and what he was doing, but didn't like being told what I was going to do. So I went off to Texas Tech, grew up in Dallas, went to Texas Tech University, studied business, thought I was going to go to law school. And it wasn't until my senior year in college when it came time to apply to law school that God had turned my heart enough to apply to Dallas Theological Seminary. During that year, Ruth, my wife, and I were married. We've been married a little over 46 years now,
Yeah.
and have 2 kids and 3 grandkids, which we enjoy very much. Served in Dallas and on the church staff with my dad for about 10 years before moving to Pennsylvania. Never thought as Texans we would move to Pennsylvania. It's just kind of ingrained in you as a Texan. You don't leave the state. And at that time, this would have been 1991, the Northeast was considered the Rust Belt. And so all of our friends in Texas were saying, why in the world would you move to the Rust Belt? But that's where God took us. And we went to a little church, about 150 people. And the first 5 or 6 years were incredibly tough. We did not see what Daniel is seeing there in Phoenix. And we grew over those 5 or 6 years to about 500 or 600 people, but just really challenging. We had, within 6 months of my being there, the board chairman who had actually brought us to Pennsylvania stood up in the middle of a board meeting, and there were only 5 or 6 elders at that time. And small church, everybody has a key to the building. And so he stood up in the middle of a meeting and very ceremoniously pulled out his keychain and took the key to the church off of his keychain, plopped it on the table, and walked out. About 12 months later, the next board chairman did essentially the same thing. And about 12 months later, the next one did. I say all that just to say it's tumultuous, and I understand when things don't go well. There was a guy, Doug, in our church named Abe. Abe was against everything I did. Each week he would send me a note telling me what I said wrong, did wrong that week in the services. back then in Pennsylvania, all the little churches had mailboxes or kind of cubby holes in the back hallway, and that's where you got your news because this was pre-internet days. And so you'd stuff all the flyers of what was going to be going on in the church in those boxes. Well, Abe would stuff the boxes with his thoughts of me and my leadership. And so every week as people would come, that's the first place you go was to look at the mail and see what's there. And so I would always have Abe's comments there to greet people. First congregational meeting, or first time we were going to hire another staff besides myself. So when I came, I was the only pastor. Even though my title was senior pastor, I was the only staff member. And it sounded good, but we had a congregational
Yeah.
meeting about 3 years in, and we were going to hire a worship leader. And somewhere along the way, Abe stood up in that meeting. And back then, everybody showed up to congregational meetings because there was always fireworks. And Abe stood up and said, "Why are we hiring anybody? Nobody can work with David." And so I say all that just to say I understand what it's like to have tumultuous times.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to dig into that like left and right. But first, can we go back to Texas Tech for just a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Daniel, you ever been in Lubbock?
I haven't. Mm-mm.
Well, it's an interesting place. My daughter, David, my oldest, that's in East Carolina, actually got into the orchestra at Texas Tech.
That was all right.
And they offered her a great, like, in-state scholarship, but this is what will always strike us, and it literally shaped my daughter. She was like, "I'm out." We got in the Uber, and the Uber driver, you remember Forrest Gump, Daniel? Do you know that movie? It's probably
Yeah.
too
Oh, yeah.
young to remember Forrest Gump. And he did all the barbecue shrimp, all the shrimp. This guy did it with the winds in Lubbock. So, is that a thing in Lubbock? Like, there's all these kind of winds. He's like from the tornadoes to the
Well,
gust wind.
it's funny because my first impression driving into Lubbock were the smells. There are feedlots there for cattle, and so there's an aroma that the winds will bring in and blow across the plains that's just overwhelming. So yeah, there's sandstorms, there are dust storms, there are lots and lots of winds in Lubbock. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So I'm glad you made it through, but my daughter was out very
Yeah,
quick.
it was a good experience, and Ruth and I met there, so it was definitely worthwhile to be
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
that's great.
I'll just
There you
finish real
go.
quick. When we went to our church, it was called Lancaster County Bible Church at the time. It morphed into just LCBC, which stands for Lives Changed by Christ. And we just say that's who we are. We're a community of people whose lives have been and continue to be changed by Christ. But ultimately, 32 years later, the church had grown to 22,000 people every weekend across 19 locations. The church has continued to grow, so probably consistently 25,000 people now each weekend in 25 locations. So God did some great things, and one of our mottos was, let's not do anything stupid to mess up what God is doing. And so we tried to stay out of his way and let him work, and so we saw God do lots of cool things.
Yeah, well,
Cool.
I want to ask you both this kind of question. So right now at Intentional Churches, one of the things we've gotten to over the last few years, a lot of our study of the church comes from the ground, like because we work with so many church teams up close across 30 plus denoms, and it just gives us a kind of pulse on what's happening in the church. And so one of the things Bart and I started saying 3 or 4 years ago was, I think the greatest headwind to church leadership is actually misalignment. Like, everybody's got a little different opinion about what church should be. And it's an exciting time for us. We got a new book coming out this fall, and it really is going to dive into this topic about how we get radical alignment to ownership of the Great Commission in our churches. But I'm curious with both of you guys, David, I want to go back to Abe and kind of like, what were you doing that was ticking those guys off so much that they were resigning? And then Daniel, I would just piggyback after David speaks. With that kind of growth, I can't believe that you don't have a lot of Christians in the mix who have a lot of different opinions about the buffet of programs that they want you to start. So I want you to talk about kind of the challenges of quick growth. But first, David, takes back to Abe and those guys. What were you doing that was so off-putting for those early guys?
Well, it's funny you talk about alignment, Doug, because really what we were doing is trying to figure out who were we as a church and what were we going to be about. And I had been brought in, even in that little group of 150, to say, how do we become a church that's really focused on reaching people for Christ? And every church says they want to do that. It's in every mission statement of every church. And yet you find out real quickly, most churches truly don't want to do that. For coming to LCBC, I probably in Texas looked at over 30 churches for over a 2-year period because Ruth and I thought we were going to stay in Texas, and none of those were right for us. Every one of them said they wanted to reach people for Jesus, but most of them didn't. And so for us, it was really all about that. And so this was 1991. It was the music wars. And Abe wanted us to quit singing those choruses and sing only hymns. And if we didn't stop, then all the people that were giving money to the church were going to stop giving money to the church, was his
Mm,
comment. And that was 6 weeks into my time there. And I just said, the elders asked me to come and to do this, and unless the elders tell me to do something differently, then I can't change. And so he left and told everybody, don't bother talking to David. He won't listen to you anyway, and became my great nemesis. And for the board chair, Doug, it was really more a matter of control. And small church, and he'd kind of run things before I came. And when I came, I guess felt some, in his mind anyway, opposition or competition there. And so his statement as he walked out the doors, you don't need me anymore, you've got David, and he walked out. But it really was about alignment. And we really landed on the purpose of saying we exist to introduce more people to Jesus and together fully follow him. And everything that doesn't fit that directly, we said we're not going to do. And if it does fit that, we'll do it, and we'll do it to the best of our ability. And there's so many good things that get in the way of that. And so one of our underlying principles was always best versus good. And if it's not
Mm.
best to accomplish the mission, we're not going to do it. If it's just good, then we're not going to get sidetracked by that. And that becomes a big, big list of what's good and what's not best. So
That is super wise. Any of our listeners out
really good.
there, good versus best. It's not often your choices in church leadership aren't bad or evil versus best. It's good versus best. And so, again, just continue on this trail of alignment. Daniel, I'm going to ask you that kind of rapid growth. Again, I'm not trying to knock on longtime Christians, but a lot of them are going to come into your environment with a very different idea about what church is supposed to be, right? So, how have you
Yeah.
guys fought? Give us a little bit of background on how that's been, and then how have you kind of fought that tendency to pull away from core, mission, vision, values that you've tried to implement?
Yeah, I'm stealing the language of best versus good. But I think for us, we came in knowing, hey, we can't do everything. There's only a few things that we can do. And we have been laser beam focused on these are the only things we can do. And everything we say yes to is us saying no to something else. It hasn't been, I think the harder part that I didn't anticipate was as our staff was going to grow, keeping alignment and unity there. Because literally just walking out of a prayer meeting with our staff of like, hey, this is what we got to be fighting towards. And I just had a meeting with a lady last week with great heart, right? We're rolling out like all of our small groups and stuff in the fall. She wants us to she's got 4 parents that all want to run a small group for young adults because their young adults are not connected to the church. And we basically said it's not something that we can do in this season. Here's what we are going to do. And she literally said, this is my frustration about big churches versus small churches. In small churches, you can just say, I'm a volunteer, I'm willing to do it. And then you just are given a key to the building and you go and do it. And I pressed a lady and I said, maybe the reason that small churches stay small is because they do a bunch of things really poorly. And what we're trying, again, we're 6 months in, it's brand new, but we're trying to do a few things really well and see if we can't disciple more people and reach more people that way. And so I just said, you just got to trust me, or I'm sure there's a small church down the road that you could probably get, a volunteer opportunity to lead a young adults ministry. Again, as a guy who spent a lot of time in young adults ministry, I'm like, that's not the most effective way to reach young adults is having a bunch of moms run a group on a Thursday night. So
Yeah, and David, I want to come back to you too because when did you feel like you turned the corner? It sounds like you were crystal clear when you came in that this is the kind of church we're going to be, and you held the line, kind of like Daniel's talking about. Like, was there a time or a turning point where it kind of flipped over, and that culture became the culture of the church, and you had less of that fight?
yeah, I think it took us for probably 5 or 6 years in, and we quit talking about what we wanted to be, and we just started being it.
yeah,
And it was noticeable 5 or 6 years in, but there were all kinds of small battles along the way, and I'll call them battles because they were. Everything, again, from the style of music to the instruments on the stage to the clothes that we wore, all those were battles that we were having to face. And I keep having to going back to and saying, this isn't because it's my preference to wear jeans or it's my preference to have us lead with a guitar instead of an organ. It's really just, and so we had lots of kind of data to back it up. We quit wearing suits and ties because back then GQ magazine said only 24% of the men owned a suit and tie. And so I was
Mm,
able to say, if we wear suits and ties, we're implying that you've got to wear suits and ties to church. Therefore, we've eliminated 76% of all men from even attending our church. And so it's not about what we wear. It's about
okay.
introducing people to Jesus. And we came to music back then, classical organ music, 3% of the population listened to that. We said it's not about teaching them a style of music. It's about using a style of music that people listen to every day. And we're trying to introduce people to Jesus. And so that's why we're going to make the change. And so if you're not careful and you make it about your preferences, then it's my preferences against yours. And we can argue that all day long. But if you've got some factual data to back it up and say, this is why we're here and this is why we're doing it, then that helped us a lot. And Doug, it was little things even like the community as we were growing as a church wanted to eliminate, we're in a little town of 4,000 people. And so they wanted to eliminate alcohol sales from our town. And at that point, we were the biggest church in town, even with 500 people. So they wanted us to become the petition center where everybody would come to our church to sign petitions to drive alcohol out of the town. And we looked at that and said, maybe that's a good thing. But for us, it's not the best thing. For us, the best thing is introducing people to Jesus. And the very people we're going to offend with your petitions are going to be the people we're trying to introduce to Jesus. So we're not going to sign your petitions. And that made all the church people in our little town mad at us and hurling all kinds of stones at us. But it was just little things like that over and over that you had to just keep saying, that's good, but it's not best. So.
That's good, man.
So good.
Yeah, I would, David, when you guys really started growing at a quicker clip, like, because our whole premise is if you get everybody, as many of your core team, whether it's your board, your staff, your back to personal ownership of the Great Commission, like it was meant to be, the byproduct's going to be numbers. It,
Yeah.
it will grow. The gospel potential of the Great Commission is acquisition. And so when that growth comes, when you're going through, your big growth spurts, I don't know if you can hit a few of those. What was some of the misalignment that you were battling that would seep in? Daniel's already talking about it, even in staff. Like, yeah. So share with our listeners some of those kind of battles. Once growth started becoming the norm, what were the misalignment points?
Well, and I'll also refer to one other thing, Doug, that helped us really kind of prove that the gospel can be attractive to people, that people can come to Christ and things change. And so when Ruth and I moved from Texas, took us almost 7 years to sell our house in Texas. So we had to rent for 7 years. And so for us, that was, oh man, this is terrible. It's tragic. And yet, as a result of that, the people we rented from were well known in the community. They were well known for not being followers of Jesus. They ended up becoming close friends of ours. They came to Christ, and then they brought about 30 or 40 of their friends and family with them in the first year that we were at LCBC. And so all of a sudden, everybody else is going, oh, this actually works. You can be winsome and you can be friends to people that are far from God and see them come to Christ. And so that kind of started this undercurrent of this works, sharing the gospel and reaching out to people far from God. And as we continued to grow, as I said, 500 or 600 people, we started just becoming, it's little things along the way where we needed to go from 1 to 2 services. No big deal, but you'd have thought it was going to be the end of the world. We're never going to see our friends. We'll never have enough volunteers. And we did it and never looked back again. And so then you kind of get to where Daniel is, where you're doing 3, 4, 5. We were doing 6, 7 services a weekend and reached a point where we needed to build. We thought that was going to stop us from growing. And yet we grew 50% in the year that we were raising money for buildings. And I think the reason was it never was about a building. It was always about introducing more people to Jesus. And so we said, we're really opening up seats for more people to come and be introduced to Jesus. We use the analogy of being a lifeboat, not a cruise ship. We said, we're not here to make these seats more comfortable for you, and that's not why we're building. We're not building so that there's more lights and sound for you. You're already here. But what we're doing is we're making it possible for there to be more seats on the lifeboat. And so we just really focused on that. And so we had no drawings for a building. We had no plans. It really was about, we're doing this to introduce more people to Jesus. And so we grew. And every time since then that we've done a stewardship or capital campaign, it was always periods of growth because it really just helps us refocus on why we're doing what we're doing. And it's not about comfort. It's really about more people coming to know Jesus. So it was those kind of things. When we hit 8,000 people, again, we're in our little community of 4,000. And so they're saying we're messing up the roads and we're taking up too much farmland. And so they said, we're not going to be given any more permits to add to our facilities. And this is around 2003 or 4. Again, we think, oh, end of the world. We're not going to be able to introduce more people to Jesus. But about that time, multi-site was just kind of getting kicked off. And we looked around and said, okay, we can do this. And so we got started multi-site. And the fun thing is now, if we've got 25,000 people on a weekend, then 19,000 of them are away from our original location. And that never would have happened had we continued to build in one place. And so I think a lot of times, Doug, the negatives that you face actually can help you dig in and say, no, we're still about introducing more people to Jesus. Let's find a way to do it and do it better. And so that drove us to multi-site. So just little things like that along the way. But it'd be so easy to get distracted. And again, people bring good things all the time. It's let's be the foster church. Let's be the foster care church, which is a good thing. But we said, yeah, but that's not exactly who we are. We're about introducing people to Jesus. So you got all these good things thrown at you all the time that you have to keep backing up and just saying, hey, that's good for you. If you want to do that, go for it. But for us as a church, this is what we're focused on.
Hmm. So good, man. And I want to dive back into just some of the leadership questions that are coming to mind. But Daniel, I want to ask you, I mean, with that kind of rapid growth that you're experiencing now, like what are you guys thinking on space?
Yeah, so one of the challenges we knew we were going to run into is we needed a midweek space to be able to do all of our functional ministry stuff. So we found, like, because right now on Sundays we meet in a high school performing arts center that seats just under 800 adults. So we started with 2 services, quickly went to 3, and then we just went to 4. And then we have a midweek space that's got an auditorium. It's got about 300 seats in it. All of our offices are there. So all of our classes, assimilation stuff, team events, student stuff can all happen here. But 4 services that we're running on Sunday mornings, it's kind of crazy. We do 8 o'clock, 9:20, 10:40, and 12 o'clock because we've got to be out of the school by 1:30. 55-minute services. It's tight, man. It's crazy. And we run in between services, 700 people in, 700 people out. And so I was just telling our advisory group, which is kind of like our board right now. I just told them, I was like, guys, I'm out of strategic ideas, right? This was all the play that I have. And so now our next move is we're looking at, potentially multi-site stuff. We're looking at some land, but every next move is much more expensive and much more difficult than the moves we've made to get to where we are today, for sure.
David, any words of advice or caution for Daniel in this moment they're in?
It's interesting, Daniel, listening to you. I would think the biggest challenge you're going to have is, and you kind of mentioned that, and you didn't even say it's a problem, but I think it's going to be staff and culture because everything is happening so quickly for you. And I know that for myself, over the 32 years, especially the last 10 years, I was the gatekeeper for culture. I was the gatekeeper for saying no. And so I found myself saying no
Yeah.
to all kinds of things. And I think what you're going to have to do, especially with the newer staff, you've got to set the culture and you've got to speak up right away when you see violations of that culture or when you see people drifting towards good versus best and speak up on that. And so I would just encourage you, man, go hard on that because if you
Yeah.
get loose, then that's going to be a challenge. And on one hand, I would strongly tell you, man, go multi-site. But the flip side of that is culture is even harder as soon as you start doing multi-site because people are not right there under your leadership. It's going to be under somebody else. And so if you don't have somebody else that
Yeah.
has the DNA like you, then the further they get away from you, both physically and just even positionally, the harder it is for you to manage that culture. And so I think probably multi-site is the answer for you, but it's going to create a whole new set of issues that you haven't even experienced yet. And so great problems to have, though. There are worse problems to have, and it's exciting that you're being challenged with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's spot on. I think the challenge we've run into on the hiring side is how do you hire people into a culture that is still being formed?
Exactly.
We've been very intentional with like when there's been a violation, we've noticed it, and we're like, okay, what did that just violate? And then how do we make that into like a staff axiom kind of thing? And so we have about 5 or 6 of them that we're trying to get everybody wrapped around. But yeah, it feels like a moving target.
Well, and the challenge in church world to me is we all have this church language, but it means very different things. We use the same words, but they mean different things from church to church. And so what we found, if we bring somebody in from the outside, and right now, if we have a staff of 300, I would say probably 275 are from the inside. But if we bring somebody from the outside, it usually takes 18 months, 2 years for them to truly understand what we mean by those words. And so here you are now 7 months in, and you're probably adding staff like crazy. and it may be another year and a half before they even get what you mean by the words you're using. So yeah, that's a challenge, but a good one to have. So.
Yeah, my experience, I wanna go back here, and I do wanna come back to multi-site here for a minute, in a bit, but I wanna come back to kinda just the my years now, I'm in my 50s, of seeing church leaders. When we're talking about this good versus best issue, there's a lot of senior leaders who struggle, maybe too strong a word, but really are more, they don't wanna hurt people. You know, they're very caring, they're very shepherding, and they lead from a heart that is very tender toward Christians who are asking for, things like this. And
Mhm.
so I see a lot of good being chosen instead of best. And I'm curious how the two of you have held that line, because ministry, when I don't know, I run into a lot of senior leaders who struggle. My senior leader used to say, "I'm a recovering codependent." And he led a lot from that shepherding, and I benefited. Like, my life was better because Kevin poured into me. But I'm curious how you guys anchor down, David, if you want to talk about to holding so firmly to knowing when something's off, and then how do you go after it in a way that's not offensive? You know what I'm saying?
Well, and I think maybe you just said it right there. I don't know that you worry about whether it's offensive or not. It's going to be perceived by some people as being offensive. And so one of our other rules, we talked about the 90-10 rule. And for us, 90-10 meant that we wanted 90% of the people to be wildly enthusiastic with us, and 10% could be wildly upset, and we were okay. And you talked about that codependency trait that probably a lot of pastors have. And we want to try to please everybody, but there's no way you're going to please everybody. And so what happens if you try to please everyone is no one's happy. And we just said, we don't want to be in that environment. And you can feel it when you walk into churches and no one's happy and they're not excited. They're there, but there's no excitement. We said we'd rather have excitement and people mad than no excitement at all. And so that's the 90-10. And so we would do things, and if people would get upset, back when we were 1,000 people, then that means 100 people upset. Now that means several thousand people upset, but it's never that bad. And so we'll do things now. We'll get 40 or 50 emails that are upset with us, and we'll kind of all cringe and go, no, we've gone too far. But then we'll say, okay, wait a minute, 90-10. So that would mean 2,000 people need to send us emails saying they're mad. We still got another 1,950 to go. We're okay. And
That's
so just
so
let us
good.
kind of keep going. And then the other thing I'd say real quick, Doug and Daniel too, is when you kind of say no to several things, the word gets out pretty quick. And so sometimes you do it just to be, just for the principle of it, just know, and you want everybody to know. And early days back in the music wars, I wrote a letter that became, and they still use it today, for people that complain about the volume of our music. And I just said, bottom line, in our culture today, people want to feel the music, experience the music. And so we're going to walk this fine line of too loud, not loud enough. And if we miss on the line, we're always going to go on too loud. It's just the way it is. And so that became legendary. One time there was a guy that always complained at a service. It was too loud. He was standing in the back. I walked up. He told me it was too loud. I just put my arm around him and said, hey, you know what? It's never going to change. Everybody heard that story. I don't know how they heard the story, but everybody heard that story. And so all of a sudden then you just become known as, Daniel's going to say no. And that takes a lot of the heat off of you. And you have to be okay with that. And, if
Yeah.
I'm about trying to please everybody, then it's going to be hard. But if I'm about trying to accomplish the mission, then I'm okay with it. So.
Yeah, so you have Jerry in your church too, David? Does he have a little decibel meter app on his phone? You know what I'm talking about? Jerry comes to mind from my days that he'd
Yeah.
hold up that
Yeah. Oh,
little
yeah. Lots
app.
of those. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of those. Daniel, how about you? How are you holding this line and not giving in? You know?
Man, it's funny. I feel like I'm in the stage right now where that people pleaser part of me is dying. Like there's like a part of me that's getting killed off that I think has to some degree. Like I think it's part of the purification process you have to go through if you want to lead something of more than 4 people, is you just have to be okay with living with a certain level of disappointment. of people being disappointed and frustrated with you. And yeah, the last handful of months, I feel like that has come to a surface, and I just like, it's got to die so that you have a backbone and can stand up and just say, hey, honestly, right now, everything I'm saying no to is to protect our staff. Like, they are redlining on all the things that I've asked them to do. And so to go to them and ask them to do, I know for you, it's just a Thursday night to come in and open the building, but it's like, that's another night that they're away from their family. And so it's really staying crystal clear on where we believe God has asked us to go, what he's asked us to do. And those are the only things that we're going to do. And anything else, we're saying no to it. And I'm unapologetically in those meetings, just letting them walk away frustrated and learning to be a little bit more okay with it. I love the 90-10 rule, because I'm nowhere near 10% of them being mad at me yet. So I'm doing a great job.
Yeah, which is good. Hey, Doug, can I just say one other thing too? I would also say though, pick your battles carefully. When I first came, we switched to small groups. There were several adult Sunday school classes. We moved to all small groups. There were 2 classes in the church that just didn't want to break up, and it really was no big deal. They each had maybe 10, 20 people in them. And so we said, yeah, we'll let you keep meeting, but we're not promoting. I think they still meet today, 32
Huh.
years later. We've never told anybody to go to them. Nobody even knows where they are. But it's like, it wasn't worth back then with 150 people running off 20 people just because we wouldn't let them do their adult Sunday school class. And so I think you pick your battles carefully. And if you don't have to offend, then you don't. But
Yeah, that's good. So I'm going to come back to this alignment conversation a little bit and say, what I've learned, because we went through in my home church here in Vegas, we went through succession where the senior pastor I served handed off to a younger, our youth guy, and very big cultural shift from that kind of shepherding environment to a challenger. Like, basically, this we went from being a hospital for the hurting to nobody can sit on their butt. Like, that's literally a phrase he used. This is a church where no one can sit on their butt. We're going to be active and in action. And that was rough in 2021, 22. A lot of people left our church, but the culture's adapted. What I tried to do to help him, his name's Drew Moore, is a lot of that sniffer. That's how I always termed it. That Drew had wasn't codified, and people only knew if they were misaligned once they stepped out of that alignment of his sniffer that's not codified and not trainable, except by experience. You guys, have you experienced this? Like, you will respond and react because it's part of your cultural DNA and who you are. And have you been able in your ministry careers to get that codified so that it can be trained? And I'm very curious, David, especially as you go into multi-site and that sniffer, you're not around as much. So
yeah,
anyway,
exactly.
talk about that. I don't know who wants to go first, but this is a real thing out there for senior leaders, especially the sniffer.
I think when you get started, a lot of what you're doing, you're going off your gut. And so it's off of Daniel's gut, what he thinks is right, not right, what I felt was right, not right. And even as we grew to, I don't know, 10, 12, 13,000 people, a staff would say, well, let's trust David's gut. David's gut is always, for the most part, right. So let's go with his gut. And that works well, to your point, until you start doing multi-site or people aren't around you to know what your gut is anymore. Or the other thing that starts breaking down is it just gets too big. And so there reached a point where I didn't know all the information anymore. And I might think I did, but I didn't. And so there was just too much going on. So we couldn't trust my gut. And that was a dangerous place to be. And so we did have to start codifying. When you go to multi-site, you have to simplify even more and you reduce what you're doing, even in the gathering, so that you can replicate it at your locations. And so that was a big codifying experience for us. The danger of going too far with the codifying is that all of a sudden you're a process-driven organization. And that feels good for a little while because everybody's doing the same thing, but they don't know the why behind it. And all of a sudden your passion is gone, your creative edge is gone, you're just running the playbook. And over time, that can begin to put you on a treadmill that's going to send you on in a bad direction. So it's that fine balance constantly of what's the gut, but also what's the process, making sure you don't go too far with either of them.
David, does LCBC have like axioms like Daniel was talking about or values that really were codifying of your gut?
Yeah, I think so. And we've got written ones, we've got unwritten ones. Like again, let's not do anything stupid to mess up what God is doing. And so we've defined what stupid is, but it's not written anywhere. It's not on the wall anywhere. But we just know, man, when we go sideways relationally because we're not talking to each other, that's stupid. And most churches blow up because of relational issues within the staff or the leadership,
Mm.
or let's not go too far down a road that's going to take us in a morally bad place with the opposite sex. And let's just be smart about it. So some of it is as simple as that, to axioms of there's no absolutes. And so the codified system says this is what we do, but there's no absolutes. There's always an exception to the rule. So let's be careful and not be stupid about following the code too much, or no surprises, and making sure that, in Daniel's case, there's nothing that happens at the church that he's going to find out on Monday or Tuesday from somebody else that he should have heard on Sunday from a staff member. And so no surprises. So
Good.
we've got a number of those kind of things
Hmm.
that we operate by.
Yeah, Daniel, how about you? How are you guys getting that figured out?
Yeah, again, I think it's very much that. I think we're in the process of figuring it out. I think the challenge is it's usually pretty gifted leaders that step in and lead organizations, and they're usually pretty intuitive. But at some point, intuitive is no longer helpful, and so we've kind of tagged the season that we're in as a staff is moving from intuitive leadership to intentional leadership. And so, how do we take everything? I mean, every process we're doing, our creative team just did a team night and it was amazing. But there were certain things that they did, like they did t-shirts, they did thank you cards, so many things that they did that the leader just does intuitively. We're now taking them, I'm forcing them, hey, write down, what did you do? So now we've got a playbook of here's the 6 things that every team, when you do a team night, needs to do that led to the success of this thing, and why this team feels so strong and why it feels so culturally sound, because they did these 6 things. So we're trying to do that in almost every environment right now, to move from, we do a lot of things intuitively, but there are intentional things behind that we can put down on paper and begin to codify into our processes.
That's so good. I
Hey,
just would,
Doug,
yeah,
can I
go
say,
ahead.
so we've gone to such detail, and this will sound, it'll almost sound ridiculous, but again, in our environments, it's down to the point where pens have to be available in certain environments, writing pens, utensils. I mean, that's in the code, and you can't be a campus without in certain environments. It's that detailed. And on one hand, you kind of go, good grief, that's being a little bit anal, and why are you going to that specific? And yet, to Daniel's point, things that I would think intuitively, where I walk into an auditorium and it's half empty. And so I know that feel is a huge piece of what's going to help us continue to grow. And so I tell the staff, take out half the chairs then. And if for the next gathering it's more full, then between gatherings we'll add the chairs back in. But we will go to that length to make sure that it feels right for the 9 o'clock and the 10 o'clock and the 11 o'clock, and not just the 11 o'clock. And so your ushers are going to go, you're kidding me. We're going to take out 300 chairs for the 9 o'clock gathering and put it back in the 11 o'clock gathering. Say, yes, we are. That's what we need, and here's why. And that's where, as the leader, you've got to be strong enough to say, I know it's inconvenient for you guys. I know it's easier to leave those chairs up and just try to rope them off. And yet for the people coming in, that feels negative. Here's why. And so here's why we're going to do it. And it's being that determined or dogmatic about the little things that I think are going to help in the long run.
Yeah. I just, our team, for years, I have been very anti-silo. I'm very developmental as a leader. Like I use the phrase that I stole from Drew. How is everybody moving toward their best contribution, including me? Like, we're going to be developmental. So that makes me, I get wiggy around org charts and titles. I don't really care about those things. Can you guys identify with that at all? Like, I want us to be more like scrum teams and less like this hierarchical thing where everybody's cross contributing. So, hey, I want to flip the script a little bit, because you guys David, you've experienced incredible growth. And for any of our listeners who are church leaders who don't know, who may be younger, both of you all, I hear and am curious about the wounds. There's got to be wounds all along this journey of growth, because people, even other church leaders, can sometimes be the most offensive, like aggressive, coming after you because you're growing and they're not, or critical of you or your model, or all this things. So I want to, in saying that, kind of flip the script. And if there are any of our listeners who are in a church that's not seeing growth, that is shrinking, that is in an area that's really a tough urban environment or a rural community, what would you challenge them with? Like, how would you challenge their thinking a little bit to maybe encourage them some? David, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why I shared my story the first 5 or 6 years is because I understand what it's like to have hard times. I mean, Ruth would, I'd come home from board meetings. Her first question was always, "You still have a job?" Every Christmas, when she would pack up her Christmas decorations, she would say, "Okay, am I packing for next year? Am I packing for a move? And where are we?" And when I first came to LCBC, I just kind of made a deal with God and said, I will not go looking. I'd been in environments where it seemed like all my pastor friends, all they did was kind of look for the next best thing. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come. We're going to stay, God, as long as you want. I'm not going to look for any place else. If you want to move me, you're going to have to do it. And he didn't do it, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. So those first 5 or 6 years, they were challenging and hard. And so one, I would just say, stick with it. Don't bail out. John Maxwell used to always say that, we're in the middle of the storm, but you're right on the edge of those storm clouds. And so get through them. I learned early on when I was in seminary and struggling through Hebrew and Greek, and a professor told me, don't ever quit in the middle of the storm. Get through the end of the semester. And then if you need to quit, quit, but don't quit in the middle of the storm. And that's carried me
Right.
in so many ways where going through hard seasons at LCBC. And once we got through those storms, Ruth and I would say, why would we ever think of leaving? Because if we leave, we're going to have to go someplace else and go through the storms again anyway. And so you've got those kind of challenges. You've got the relational issues where one of my closest friends and one of the biggest contributors at LCBC, when his kids hit their teenage years, they were struggling. He didn't like our student men guy, wanted me to fire him. I didn't agree with him. And I said, I can't do that. And
Mm.
so lost that family, lost that friendship, lost that contributor. But you just have to kind of say, man, I'm sorry, but I don't agree with you on this one. And so you stick to your guns. And so there's definitely hurt there. But again, I think that's part of what helps us grow. That's part of what brings maturity on our side, keeps us sensitive and things like that. So, yeah.
It's a great viewpoint. Daniel, you have any wisdom or encouragement you would offer? Maybe some pastors out there who aren't feeling this kind of growth?
Yeah, I think sometimes we get so binary in our thinking that we just think bigger is going to be better. And I think bigger potentially creates different problems, but they're problems nonetheless, And I think that there is I don't know. People kept telling us in the church planting process that the cost of this thing is pretty high. And I just don't think you know what it is until I think God gives you a grace, because if we knew what it was going to be going into it, I don't think anybody would ever actually do it. And so I sit back and look at guys, like David, who pastor churches, and all I really see is, man, how much this costs his family. And I think that's I forget the quote, but it's like your ability to tolerate pain is kind of one of the determiners of how much God can use you. And I think that's a very real thing with growth. Is there's a level of pain that you just have to learn to endure. And I think sometimes the idea that bigger is just inherently better is not always true. It creates different problems, and there's a cost to all of it. But I think faithfulness is the goal.
Yeah, and I want to encourage our listeners by saying, hey, listen, go read the Gospels again through the lens of Jesus exemplifying Great Commission teaching. Look at how quickly Levi was in an evangelistic setting. Look at how quickly James and John, like it was immediate. There was no like preparation class for 12 months. And we get hung up in this sometimes, in this discipleship. Speaking of words that mean about 1,000 different things, David, discipleship conversation. And so my encouragement to any pastor there, your church can get here. You just have to get a core that's owning that evangelistic heartbeat that Jesus gave us. We're going to need to round the corner here toward the end, but David, I don't want to leave without a minute talking about, okay, there's so many things I would love to discuss, and maybe we do this again at some point, but you have handed off, and I don't want to really drill into that very much today, but I want you to talk about kind of what you're doing now and why you've gone there with Global Leadership Network, and then explain to our listeners the advantage and what you're seeing there.
Yeah,
And
appreciate that. And one other comment back on cost. John Maxwell, one of his favorite talks, I pirated it and put it on CDs, now on other formats for people to get. But his whole talk was church will stop growing when the cost gets too high. And his whole point was there at some point there's a cost you have to pay, and it wasn't dollars. And he would say, it's not, churches don't grow just because you pray a lot, because there's a lot of praying churches that don't ever grow. And it's not because of theology, it's not because of location or name. And he goes through all these things that it's not, but it's when the cost gets too high. And the cost is too high when there's a staff member on Daniel's team that wants to go a different direction. And Daniel goes, okay, well, I don't want to make that staff member mad, so we'll go the way that staff member wants. Well, you just put that staff member in charge of the growth of the church. And so you kind of said, I don't want to upset that staff member. I don't want to upset that person in my church. And so the cost would be too high to upset them. Well, you've just said that's where we're going to stop growing. So anyway, it's a great talk that if you're able to
So
go back
good.
and find it, I'd love it. And I give it out to everybody that I can. And then as far as transition, Doug, for me, what's caused me to change wasn't because I felt like I was too old to lead anymore, but had opportunity to sit with Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, and we were in a small group of 10 or 15 guys. He's talking about his levels of leadership, and his level 5 is his highest. And so, again, pridefully, selfishly in my head, I'm sitting there thinking, well, surely I'm a level 5 leader. And then as he's talking, he says, well, you're never a level 5 leader until you've actually left your organization, and it's better with you gone than with you there. And that totally rattled me, because in my mind, I thought when I step away, they're going to struggle some. They're going to realize what a great leader David was. And I joked with the congregation and said, weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's what I was hoping they would do when I chose to step away. And
Yeah.
Collins just said, if that happens, you're a terrible leader. You did not provide and set up well. And so that started me on this journey to make sure LCBC was better when I'm gone than when I was there. And when it seemed the appropriate time for me to step away, wasn't totally sure what I was going to step into. One of the things was working with pastors in Pennsylvania. And just we reached out to the largest churches, 80 largest churches in Pennsylvania. Their pastors said, would you want to meet with us? And let's start talking about how to introduce more people to Jesus in Pennsylvania. So we started that. That's called The Advantage. And we get together several times a year in cohorts and just share best practices and say, what do we need to do to reach more people for Jesus? There's no cost to be a part of that. Instead, it's just to be a part of it, you have to agree to mentor 10 other pastors yourself. And so now that group has grown in a year and a half to about 300 pastors. We think by this fall we'll hit 500 pastors. And so that's one thing. And that was keeping me busy, but not real busy. And so at some point, Ruth sat me down and she said, you need to go find something else to lead. And then she looked and she said, and it's not her, it's not me, she said. And apparently I was giving too much guidance around the house as to what to do. Actually, the thing that she set her off was we got on a wall a panel of 4 light switches. And so I was kind of guiding her on how to make sure all 4 were either up or down at the same time. And she said, that's it. I'm done. I've survived without you being here at home all these years. You need to go find something else to lead. And so about that time, Global Leadership Network was going through a transition, and I'd been on their board for a while. We've hosted the summit for years. Been very instrumental in building a leadership culture at LCBC. I'm not a fan of the mythical leadership pipeline. I think it's more of a culture you create where you've got lots of leaders in your midst, and then when you need them, you can reach into a pool of people instead of just opening a spigot and one pops out. And so the summit was a huge piece for us in that and developing that culture. And so stepping into that and really focused on helping churches and pastors. So for me, it fit really well to be able to do that. So that's what I'm doing now, and love both the Advantage and the Global Leadership Network and being a part of those things.
That's great, David. You set an example for me, because I'm like, I'm feeling the same. I'm like, I don't know. I've got gas in the tank, but I see his future. I'm already thinking we got to hand this thing off for it to have the legacy it needs. Hey, thank you both for joining me today. It's been a great conversation, and listeners, if you want to check it out, we've got a new smaller version of the book coming out this fall that several of the IC churches have been shaping this final book that's coming out. But there's an ebook called Radical Alignment: The Surprising Journey to Becoming an Intentional Church. You can click on that and download. And thank you for listening. David, Daniel, awesome. Thanks. Keep leading. All right.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys.
Hey there, One Community Hub. Hope you enjoyed that conversation today. I know I did with Daniel and David. Both you guys, I'm going to ask this question. Younger leaders especially, give a practical tip of wisdom about how they can still fight for this idea of radical alignment in their own churches to keep everybody grounded in this idea of personal ownership of the Great Commission. Daniel, you want to head at first?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think David would be brilliant with systems and stuff like that. I think the thing that sometimes it's as simple as you living the culture. Who is the one that you're reaching to? Talk about that with your staff. Talk about the person you're intentionally coming to Christ. Celebrate. The girl that was our one for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 months was our server at our Friday breakfast spot. I just got to baptize her. Her kids are in our students ministry, and we celebrated it like crazy. And it didn't, none of the systems will create the return that something like that does, where I'm living it. And this is the expected culture of our staff. So live it. Don't just teach it.
That's great, man. David?
I think, Doug, understand that God called you to lead the church, not be the most popular person in the church. And I think that sometimes we come in and we want everybody to love us, everybody to like us, and it's fun to be loved and it's fun to be liked. But if you're going to lead, then you are going to upset somebody. Somebody's going to have a different opinion than you, a different desire than you, want to go a different direction or preference. And so you have to decide, am I here to lead or am I here to make friends? And, you can't totally discount your friends. You still need to have friends. You can't be obnoxious or stupid about it, but you do have to set the course and say, here's where we're going. And so you get out, and to Daniel's point, you set the pace and you're the example, the model. I always kind of go back to the game, Doug, of follow the leader. And when I was a kid and would play follow the leader, there'd always be some kid that was incredible in gymnastics and then get out there and then do flips and all kinds of cartwheels. And everybody would stop the game and watch them do flips and cartwheels, but nobody could play the game because it was too tough. And as a leader, we've got to be careful we don't get out too far in front. We're doing cartwheels and flips that nobody else can follow, but we've got to be out there enough that they can see what we're doing. They see it works, which is what Daniel said, but not so far out there to admit that I can't do cartwheels, actually. Oh, you can't either? Well, that's okay. Let's do what we can together and move forward. So, lead and don't worry about being popular.
Very good. One Community Hub, I just encourage you to think about and discern what's the next thing you need to tackle in your personal leadership to keep alignment still in your church. Thank you for tuning in.